welcome to this LinkedIn Live from me, Donna Stevenson, here at Neurobox, and Richard Purcell from Carescribe. This is exciting, guys, because this is the first LinkedIn Live that Neurobox have done, and what an honour for me that I'm the host of it. Can't tell you how excited I am, and I've got a great guest in Richard, and we'll get chatting shortly. But first of all, I just want to wish everyone a really happy Neurodiversity Celebration Week. I mean, it should be Neurodiversity Celebration Week every week, and Richard, I think we're going to speak about probably why that should be the case, isn't it, in a minute. But this, of course, is a really special time for us. So it's great to have your company either live or if you're listening to the recording. So let's get started then. We've called this session to disclose or not to disclose. And, we can't think about neurodiversity without thinking about this really important issue about if or when we want to share that we are neurodivergent. And I can think of no better guest to take us through this session. We're going to have a conversation than Richard Purcell. Rich, hi.
Hi, Donna. Thanks so much for having me on. This is my first ever LinkedIn Live as well.
Oh, is it? I didn't realise. Right, Rich, well, we'll support each other through it. I am kind of nervous.
Yeah, we're in it together.
And your lovely dog in the background.
Oh, yeah, Mitchell, my support spaniel in the background, yeah.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Right, well, let me introduce you and then we'll get chatting. I'm so enthusiastic, I'm kind of jumping in already. So as I said, you are Richard Purcell, and absolutely brilliant, Rich. You're the founder and director of Carescribe, a piece of assistive tech I've been a huge fan of for a long time. You're also the founder and director of Medical, am I saying that right? Yeah. Brilliant. And something else that you might discuss as we're chatting away during this session is that you're also an NHS doctor as well. And also, I suppose generally, and this is anybody who's listening to this can hear the patterns here, folks, of all the work that Rich does. Of course, you're an entrepreneur, because how could you not be creating those wonderful companies? You promote accessibility, inclusion, and education in the workplace, which is no better, endeavor really. So, Rich, a huge thank you for joining us on this Neurobox LinkedIn Live.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the intro.
Brilliant. Well, let's get started then, because we've got a lot to get through here. I had shared on my LinkedIn profile, and by the way, everybody, if you're listening, please do reach out to Rich and I on LinkedIn, as well as, Neurobox and Carescribe, if you want to keep in touch with us. But when I'd highlighted, Rich, that we were going to have this conversation about disclosure, I'd put on a statistic that I've been aware of for quite some time now. It came from Made by Dyslexia about, 73% of neurodivergent folks hiding their neurodiversity in the workplace. And this was kind of, I guess, the inspiration about why we wanted to talk about disclosure, because it's still a huge subject, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a pretty shocking statistic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And, unfortunately, in some ways, I think we're still in that place, even though, in some ways, I know a lot of people have said to me it's the best of times and the worst of times around neurodiversity. Yes, we've got these, celebration times, but for some of us, we're still not there in terms of sharing our true selves. So to start us off, I think, Rich, I was just wanted us to have a think about what we mean by disclosure and why it's important. Could I come to you in terms of what does disclosure mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess at a very high level, disclosure really is about kind of revealing or sharing information about yourself, particularly normally regarding kind of personal characteristics, experiences, conditions. And then I think when you kind of relate that to those who are neurodivergent like me, it often relates to sharing their diagnosis and its impact on them, and usually related to sharing that with their employer or people they work with. And I think, as you said, that statistic that it was at 73%, that's just such a shame, because I think it's, particularly important for people in the workplace, as it is for anybody, to be able to reach your kind of full potential in work. You need not only to understand about the organization you're working for, but you need that organization to understand about you. And if there's this kind of hidden secret, then that's a real barrier to doing that. So without knowing about being inquisitive and knowing about those kind of members of your team and your peers and your colleagues and the people you manage, understand what they're good at and what they struggle with. How can you sort of expect them to reach their full potential? So yeah, I think that's kind of where kind of disclosure comes in for me anyway.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I couldn't agree more, actually. I think for me, and I've been in this community now for around 20 years, this is an issue that never gets old. I think it's being discussed all the time. And I've literally, because it's a busy week here at Neurobox, I've literally just come from a lunch and learn. And actually the team had said, can you talk briefly about disclosure and identification and so on? For all the reasons that you share, Rich, I think, isn't it? In terms of, for an organisation, they're passionate, we hope, about getting the best out of folks. And it's important then that we encourage people to share of themselves if they feel confident and comfortable enough to do so. I think for the individual themselves, I think I get it why sometimes, unfortunately, people won't share this information because, in reality, you think maybe you're not going to make it through the recruitment process and get that interview and so on. Then when you're in the organisation itself, you think, oh, I just don't know when is a good time to share this. And I think as we chat during this session, we'll maybe go through, unpick some of these issues and go through these different layers. On the back of everything you said, Rich, I think, it's really important to my mind about why disclosure is an issue, because I think it's a bit of a barometer about where we're at with our own journey and for the organisation within it. And I often say to organisations, as I'm delivering training and I'm part of the training team here at Neurobox, and I've been training for many years, it's my absolute passion, is that I think for those folks who aren't sharing of themselves because they're frightened to share for whatever reason, being judged and so on, that's the bit for somebody like me that I'm passionate about figuring out with the organisation. Okay, how do we stop this happening? Because we want people to feel comfortable, don't we? I think, Rich, we talk a lot now about psychological safety. And I think it's really important when we're talking about neurodiversity that that's a part of what we have in place. In your experiences then, how do some of these issues with disclosure manifest?
Yeah, I think you're kind of spot on with what you said there, Donna. It's kind of ultimately what we're talking about is people being willing and really brave enough to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And it is a people think vulnerability is weakness, and it isn't. It couldn't be further from it. It's a really strong characteristic to be vulnerable, and it's a big ask. And I think my kind of, like, as you said, like in the intro, like my trade is being a doctor. So like kind of that was my kind of professional background. And I think I would kind of been spoilt a bit really within medicine because it's easy to take for granted that role that you kind of get to have in people's kind of most vulnerable moments. And within medicine, there's that kind of historic precedent that you go and see your doctor, you're prepared to be vulnerable and open.
Yes.
Like kind of
good point. Yeah.
Comes with the territory, right? And unfortunately, I think as I've kind of moved into kind of business, I kind of have realized that actually it's almost the opposite, maybe the precedent within kind of corporate environments, and almost you're expected to kind of don this professional persona in the workplace. And part of that is leaving a big chunk of who you are at the door, and being strong and not being vulnerable, and not talking necessarily about yourself. And again, you kind of mentioned that study at the start, and there's another study which was kind of interesting, which was, I think it was Neurodiversity in Business and Birkbeck University. And what they looked at was, or what they showed was that 65% of neurodivergent individuals fear discrimination from their employer regarding disclosure. And interestingly, 55% feared discrimination from their peers.
Yeah.
So when you talk about psychological safety and the importance of ultimately creating a workplace culture that sort of champions inclusion and fosters that psychological safety, it really is a culture, because it's not just necessarily managers, it's also the wider organization. And and organizations having that focus and having that drive towards those sorts of inclusive workplaces, that's no easy thing to do. It's a big challenge, and there's no magic pill, but it really involves kind of a multifaceted and kind of whole team, whole organization approach to it, really.
Yeah, very wise words, Rich. I think there's a lot of people who aren't sure about disclosure as well, especially, on the back of what you've said. I've been asked for many years, and as I said, I've literally just done a lunch, and then they'd said to me, Donna, can you speak about this? Where, folks who are neurodivergent think, do I have to disclose? If I don't declare it on my application, or am I going to get into trouble in some way? And I think, for some people, they're quite relieved when you say to them, no, it's a personal choice. And so this session is not about, pushing people out of what they're comfortable with. Some people will listen to this and say, I've never disclosed, and I never plan to. And that's totally, if that's you as I'm talking during this LinkedIn Live, that's your prerogative. But I guess, I think on the back of what you say, Rich, what we want to try and do is make sure that if, in order to think about getting the best out of yourself in the workplace, and, bigger than that, the organisation themselves thinking we want people to share because we want to try and get the best out of them. Ideally, yeah, I think we want to get to a position where people are sharing and feel really comfortable to share as you're going into, an organisation. I suppose the other issue is, like you said, Rich, and that's really fascinating. We always think it's going to be people thinking, oh, I'm not going to get that job, or my boss is going to think less of me. I loved what you're saying about peer to peer. My colleagues are going to judge me, actually. And that's an area I think that we don't think a lot about. We almost forget, I think, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not our working relationships kind of are in all directions, aren't they? And actually, it might be important that your manager understands a lot about you, but it's also important that your peers understand about you. And I think when it comes to kind of disclosure, it's kind of thinking about the fact that, there's a lot that you as an individual can benefit from you talking about yourself and sort of almost teaching the organization about who you are. But also the organization, that you benefit a huge amount from understanding your employees, what their strengths are, what the things they find challenging are. So it really is kind of a mutual benefit to have this kind of that sort of reciprocal learning. And you mentioned about people when they join the organization, and I kind of think it's interesting because often, sort of traditionally, when you look at onboarding people into organizations, it's almost always focused on, and that onboarding is something that organizations spend a lot of money on, they can be very proud of, and they often measure. And usually it's almost always focused on get this individual to understand the processes and ways in which this business runs. And so rarely is it about, and we need to understand a lot about that individual. And I think there's a big shift that needs to happen there. And actually, almost by having that approach, if we need to have this individual understand the processes, and more about this organization, it almost disencourages people from talking about themselves. It's like going out for dinner with somebody and them saying, I'm interested in, I like the Twilight films, and then you opening up about your troubled childhood. It's not a balanced conversation, is it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, I think it's important during this chat. We've got some comments that I'm going to go through in a minute. But I think it's important we keep it real during this conversation, Rich. And somebody had shared with me, actually, it was last week, because it was in preparation for the dyslexia show. We've both just come off on the back of that dyslexia show, haven't we, in the NEC. And I was going through prepping up because I was hosting the workplace space in there with the support, of course, of Neurobox. And I'd said to the guys on the panel where I was hosting, right, let's have a think about disclosure. I'm going to ask you guys at the end, any advice for somebody who wants to disclose. And this particular person said to me, I don't want to give advice, Donna, because I've done that before. The person listened to it, went back to their employer, full of enthusiasm and confidence after listening to a talk this person had delivered, and actually then received a lot of misunderstanding and, yeah, I guess ultimately discrimination on the back of it, and unfortunately ended up leaving the role. And this is where I think it's really important, isn't it, that we call this stuff out, because this is where, for a lot of us, unfortunately, this is still the lived experience in our workplaces, isn't it? That they can hear people like us talking in these ways and hopefully get lots of inspiration from it, but then think, well, that's not what my experience is when I'm going back, on Monday morning into my workplace. I just don't feel I'm there yet. So it really gave me food for thought, because I suppose in our line of work, Rich, and what you do at Carescribe and so on, you can almost forget that sometimes, yeah, for a lot of people, they are really not in a great place with their differences in those ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to take for granted. I'm kind of now in a lucky position where, as a business leader within Carescribe, we can kind of try and sculpt and create that the environment that we would want to work in, with that kind of focus on the individuals that work within the organization. But I've certainly worked in lots of big organizations, lots of NHS trusts, and all the way from very bad experiences to very good experiences, and really it came down to me feeling psychologically safe to talk about myself, and for the organization to seem interested in who I was and what I was good at and what I was not so good at. And ultimately was the difference between me in these different environments kind of surviving and just getting by versus kind of thriving and doing really well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And some interesting comments, Rich, I'm going to read out if that's okay. I won't share any names, but we've got a comment here. Difficult to disclose for this particular person, Sharon. And thank you so much for sharing these thoughts, guys. Difficult to disclose as dyspraxia is often mocked, not taken as seriously as other differences, which is painful to read. I'm so sorry you've had that experience. And I suppose it starts us thinking, Rich, about the differences in some of the neurodivergent differences. Maybe some folks, think, well, okay, it's not too bad to talk about dyslexia here, but I really don't want to talk about my ADHD or whatever. Do we feel that there's a level playing field maybe between some of the differences? Rich, I know that's a really tricky question to ask.
Yeah.
And as I'm asking it, I'm thinking, what's my own answer to this?
I think that is a really tricky question, and I think unfortunately that it probably isn't a level playing field, and there is going to be a whole host of prejudices people have and about about different conditions, and really a lack of understanding about the breadth of the kind of neurodiverse landscape. And to a degree, that's one of the great things about the neurodiversity movement, really, is the idea of making people aware that ultimately no two people, whether they both have dyspraxia or dyslexia or no two people are the same. And actually what we kind of try and advocate for within Carescribe is the idea of people being unique, and that no two people are the same, and almost the label shouldn't really matter. What you're trying to have is an inquisitive approach about people, and in doing that, understanding what their strengths are and what they find difficult, and support where they find difficult and optimize where they have strengths. And as an organization, you just reap so many rewards by doing that. And then obviously for the individual, you're putting them in a position where they can feel fulfilled. But I think you're right. I think unfortunately, currently there isn't a level playing field, but hopefully by having conversations like this, awareness weeks, active engagement, you can start to encourage it and move things in the right direction.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think, and guys, of course, I'm going to say this because I shared at the beginning, I'm passionate about training. I think this is where training comes in as well, isn't it? Is about, exploring all the differences. I know we certainly do here at Neurobox, and I've done so for many years. Even when I'm being asked to speak about dyslexia, for example, in and of itself, you can't really talk about a difference in isolation. So yes, it's about how it links with other differences, co-occurring differences, and as you say, Rich, the person themselves, intersectionality and so on, all these different things, the layers that are wrapped around, the comment was specifically about dyspraxia. I mean, the work that the charity, the Dyspraxia Foundation, does around this community is brilliant. So yeah, I'm sorry that for you as that our listener to this has had that experience. I hope that you're not on your own. Please do reach out to me if I can assist and signpost you to some great organisations out there. But it's a really interesting question about certain differences maybe you feel that are misunderstood, disrespected, horribly that you share, laughed at, and it just the mind boggles. But again, it indicates that we're not there yet. We've come a long way, still got a long way to go. I've got another comment here, and then I wanted to have a chat about another question, Rich, if that's okay. We've got the comment, I feel from the neurodiversity perspective, proactive disclosure would be dependent on the culture of the organisation or the employer. For example, are the policies, procedures, dyslexia friendly, visible from management top down? I couldn't agree more. I am passionate about culture. That's where, to me, training sits within that as one of the ways we smash through that ignorance really, and push culture forward within an organization. Rich, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the placing of culture around disclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think culture is that's what this is all about, really, isn't it? It's creating that kind of that culture of inclusivity and openness where people feel able to bring their whole selves to work or talk about what they talk about and celebrate what they're good at and what they find difficult in an environment where they know that will be accepted and accommodated. I think for me, there's a couple of things you kind of touched on. One was the role of if people are able to, ultimately, I kind of feel like what we need to drive towards is a position where people feel comfortable and able to, or it's almost part of the culture that you would talk openly about what you find difficult. And in doing that, one of the next most important steps, I think, which again, training kind of comes into, is communication skills for our kind of managers and our leaders, because it's one thing to put people in a position where they feel able to disclose, but it's also all about how that's received and managed. And I think, unfortunately, there's kind of a general kind of belief in some places that kind of communication skills are kind of innate. You either have it or you don't. You're either good at it or you're not. And I can tell you from sort of clinical practice that it is definitely learnt and honed, especially when you're looking at those sensitive and vulnerable conversations. And I think we really need to be arming our managers and business leaders and whole organizations with the communication skills and the knowledge of these kind of subject matters to be able to comfortably enter into what can be sensitive conversations in a way where people feel like they are listened to, supported, where you can have that inquisitive approach and get the more holistic picture of what might be going on, and then offer support or signpost and all of those sorts of things. And then in doing that, the other thing is, when you get that kind of holistic understanding and those of the challenges that exist within your workforce, is feeding that back into your organization. So you mentioned kind of policies that and processes that support those who are neurodivergent. Well, as you understand the challenges people within the organization might be facing, how are you adapting to those and then feeding them back in so those challenges are removed from the off, and actually almost taking the onus off disclosure, because a lot of barriers are removed by default because you've listened to your workforce.
Yeah, it's starting to sound, Rich, like this is good practice, isn't it? This should be really standard within our organisations as good people practice, really, not an add-on or something in quotes special that maybe, that we need to explore during Neurodiversity Celebration Week. This should be as a matter of standard if we're, serious about getting the best out of our workforce. I love what you said about being comfortable. I think that's a really important word. And actually, one of our other listeners has said, tying in with that, I think the workplace and employers need to ensure that they're more inclusive so that people feel comfortable without having to share. That this person shares, I disclosed, oh dear, and got rejected and mocked and discriminated against by colleagues. And this again, Rich, is reinforcing, this idea that, sometimes when people do disclose, it hasn't always got a happy ending, has it? It ends up whereas this person's sharing that they've been, ridiculed and discriminated against and so on.
Yeah, that's really, really horrible to hear. But yeah. It's I think it is around that whole workplace culture, and it isn't just from a manager perspective, but it's also from a peer's perspective. The other thing when it comes to disclosure is, it isn't necessarily an all or nothing. It isn't. You don't have to start with taking absolutely all the information to your your company and say this is me, absolutely everything. If you don't feel comfortable with it, you can take some information, something pertinent that you think is important, and put that forward if you feel particularly uncomfortable or it's particularly risky or you're not 100% sure how it's going to be received. I mean, again, ideally you would want every organization to feel comfortable and able to take whatever information you need, but practical advice and putting that hat on, I guess, acknowledging that not all organizations are going to be the most approachable. Just be aware that you don't have to take, it's not an all or nothing approach, really.
Yeah, I love that. And very wise words, Rich. Thank you. You're right. I think, sometimes we've just got to put our own self-care first, make sure that we're, like you said, we keep saying this, we're in a safe space, we're comfortable. And it doesn't have to be this maybe big pronouncement. Like you said, I like that idea. It might be step by step if we feel like our previous comment that you might not be, accepted in some way. A really interesting one here from another listener, and thanks so much for sharing some really good words of wisdom in the chat box. We've got here, I usually disclose because they'll find out pretty quickly when I'm sat there in front of them that I am neurodivergent. If they treat me differently because of that, would I really want to work for them? Probably not. So we've got this idea, I think, Rich, and thank you for sharing that. Again, real wise words. I'm going to go maybe a bit bigger than that. And sometimes I often get asked, for folks who are looking for another job, where can I go in terms of finding a safe place to work? And I think one of the ways, Rich, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is a disability confidence scheme. For example, if you see that logo, we hope that's a good place to work in terms of that is somewhere where you can feel confident to share with yourself that you're neurodivergent. What are your thoughts on that, Rich?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's a really good place to start, and kind of really thinking about if you're neurodivergent, and that's a big part of who you are and the way your approach to work, then looking for things like that when you're looking for jobs, even going onto LinkedIn and seeing okay, neurodiversity awareness week, what did this company
brilliant
what did they post for it, those sorts of things are going to be really key indicators for their approach to embracing neurodiversity. The other thing is to raise it at interview. Everybody. If you go to any interview, usually there is a point for questions. You can always ask those things, but I know that maybe it's pretty akin to disclosing. But yeah, you could always raise it early on in interview processes as well.
Yeah, I think we always think when we're thinking about workplace issues, and as I say, I've worked in this space for a few decades now, in terms of, the organisation always having the upper hand which of course, they do. You're going to work for this organization, so there is sometimes a power imbalance. But actually, for us as potential new recruits, we do have some power in that journey, I think, Rich, isn't it? Like you say, it's about, as we were talking about disability confidence scheme and so on, I suppose it's about being, almost, a wise consumer, almost, of thinking, right, is this an organization that I want to place myself within? They're not part of any kind of scheme to show that they are disability friendly, or as you say, Rich, there isn't really been any clues that there might be any initiatives there where they've got a commitment to differences in that way. And I guess for us as employees, it's about thinking, do I want to work for an organization like that? Maybe we forget sometimes that is a bit of power that maybe we do hold as an employee.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, you're a valuable asset,
Yeah.
and you kind of got to remember that. And yeah, you want to be put in a position where you're fulfilled at work, and you're reaching your full potential, and kind of, yeah, I think being prepared to say, if an environment is not suited for you, or yeah, isn't going to allow you to flourish, really, then yeah, maybe it isn't for you, and look elsewhere. But thankfully, we're moving in a direction that hopefully more and more organisations are becoming more neuro inclusive. But yeah, there's a bit of a long way to go still.
Yeah, I think so. On the back of that, then, Rich, and I can see there's still comments coming through, so don't worry, guys, I'll dip in again in a moment. But just to move the conversation a little bit forward as well, I spoke a little bit earlier about somebody telling me last week I gave advice to somebody, they went off, disclosed, and then it didn't, unfortunately, have a good ending for them. With that in mind, I am going to ask you, Rich, about, any words of wisdom that we can share with folks who maybe are undecided. I know we've said this is definitely a personal choice, so we're not under any obligation. That being said, if we don't share, then we can't get our reasonable adjustments and so on, because of course the organization won't know that we have those needs. What we hope, I think we are slowly getting to this place. Certainly, the organisations I've worked with over the years will often say, right, we're going to have a matter of standard for everybody, whether you've disclosed or not. We're going to put in some, tried and tested neurodiverse friendly strategies and so on. For example, speech to text software will be embedded in all our machines and so on and so forth. So that, for those who are still choosing not to share, there is some, support there to assist in whatever, differences that you may be living with. But if somebody's thinking, listening to this, and I suspect some people will come to this conversation thinking, right, what next for me? Any words of wisdom to share, Rich, about, how we disclose, should I disclose, and so on?
Yeah, I think it's understanding fundamentally it is in disclosure and talking about ultimately, the things that you are good at, and the things that you maybe struggle with, is in the interests of both parties, right? It isn't selfish for you to do this. This isn't, it doesn't need to be about you going and saying, oh, I have this diagnosis and I need you to make these accommodations. And, if you think about it purely like that, and that, you can end up starting thinking, oh, well, this might be a burden on the organization, and go down that route. But it actually can be a really positive experience. And it can be something as simple as saying, I'm dyslexic, which can show itself in a number of ways. I'm particularly good at this, but I might need support and can struggle with, this and that.
Yeah.
And you're as much saying these are the things that I'm particularly good at, and you might want to take advantage of, as saying these things may be particularly cognitively taxing or stressful for me, and therefore just be aware that if that's what you're asking me to do lots of, then, so I think it's kind of trying to have that shift and saying this isn't, this is very much in the interest of both parties, that one being you and one being the organization, and that it isn't necessarily a negative thing. It can both be very framed as a positive thing and is a very positive thing. So So yeah, I think that's kind of all I would sort of say really about, if you're thinking of disclosing and you've got reservations, then kind of really drill down on what are those reservations, and are they my misconceptions, or is it my prejudice that's stopping me, or is there something clear and clearly demonstrable in the organisation that's putting me off? So yeah.
Yeah, really lots of food for thought there, and I totally agree with you. I suppose on the back of that, it is about, if you think, right, I'm going to do it, maybe this week is a good time for you to share of yourself, for those of you who listen, because it is Neurodiversity Celebration Week. And this could be a decision you've come to after, thinking a lot about over the years. I guess it's about, as Rich says, it's about, if I can put it almost like, just prep up, do your homework, almost prepare, as Rich said, all the things that you're fantastic at connected to, your role. And then, yeah, it's about balance, isn't it? It's about thinking, okay, this is the things I'm really great at, and connected to the day job that I do. And then, yeah, these are some of the areas of challenge, and figuring out, if you've already got your own strategies in place, sharing of that. Well, I already do this, but maybe you can support me with that, because maybe I am going to need some technology and so on. And I think this is where it's a workplace needs assessment is so useful, to do that deep dive into, who you are as an individual as well. Rich, on the back of what we're sharing then, and I'll start us off, the importance of allies and, networks and so on. I know certainly from my experience, if people are thinking about, oh, should I disclose, shouldn't I, having people, role models, whatever we want to call them, champions within the organization who've already talked about the differences, whether it's dyspraxia, dyslexia and so on, really, really helps, doesn't it, Rich? What's your experience with that?
100%. And I think if there's any sort of business leaders, managers listening, then yeah, just kind of acknowledging the power of role modeling, really, and saying, if I want to create and work in a culture where people feel psychologically safe to disclose, maybe I need to take that brave step and be vulnerable and share some things about myself, because by doing that yourself, you're going to encourage that in others. It's to a degree, contagious, and yeah, and I think as you say, like, yeah, in particular, role modeling is kind of is crucial. I mean, within Carescribe, we're kind of lucky in the sense that we're very focused on neurodiversity as an organization and what we do. Myself and the other two founders, Tom and Chris, we're all neurodivergent as well. We talk openly about the things that we find difficult and the things that we feel we're particularly good at. And that's kind of distilled kind of top down throughout the organization to try and encourage and put people in a position where they feel able to do that. There's a really interesting book, actually, which has been kind of going around the office, called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I don't know if you've heard of it already. It's like a great book for lots of reasons. If you're kind of a people manager of any description, I'd really kind of recommend it. But one of the things she talks a lot about psychological safety and the importance of role modeling, but she talks about that she has kind of created for herself almost kind of like a user manual, which travels around with her. So when she has somebody, she starts either working for someone new or someone new starts working for her, she kind of provides this kind of, oh, look, this is me. This is kind of generally kind of what I'm good at, what I struggle with. If you come to me 4:00 on a Thursday, well, I sometimes might be struggling because of this, that, and the other. And I just thought that was a really nice kind of a lovely idea, especially for kind of business leaders and managers, to kind of almost embed in an organization and kind of set the tone. When you're kind of maybe line managing someone new or even going into a new organization. But
yeah, I love that. I'll look up for that, because I think that speaks of what you said a little earlier about being confident to be vulnerable. For those of us who are maybe a little bit further on in our journey, to speak for that helps others, doesn't it? I think, Rich, you maybe think, okay, well, Rich or Donna's spoken about that. Maybe it's time now I will. And talking about the lunch and learn I just delivered as I was hot footing it across to this LinkedIn Live, during that session, quite a senior leader in the call said, right, I just want to share, I have dyslexia. And that is so powerful, I think, isn't it? When people think, oh, okay, this person does, right, okay, now I'm going to share. This is a safer place, I think. Yeah, so I think, we shouldn't underestimate, for those of us who maybe are a wee bit more confident to speak out, our place in doing so is playing it forward, isn't it? For people who aren't there yet. Really important that we show up for each other, I think. Rich, we've got some more comments in the chat, and then I want to come to you. You've talked about Carescribe because I want to know more about Carescribe. I've told you, I've been a fan for quite some time, so I want to unpack some of that if that's okay. But we'll come to some comments first. So we've got one here. Just to clarify, an employer has a duty to communicate effectively with neurodivergent employees as they would with other colleagues as well. Yes. So this is it. If you have disclosed and so on, I think it's really important. Again, not everybody knows this stuff. The neurodivergent differences are protected under the Equality Act. You have rights, and so if you have disclosed, yes, you have rights to be supported and so on, and be communicated in the ways that you need to have information shared with you. So thank you for that. It's a really great heads up. Another interesting one, we've got conflict can often come when a manager or supervisor, for example, has preconceived ideas or unconscious bias, and or the lack of skills for managing and supporting neurodivergent persons in the workplace. So we've not really talked about this yet, Rich. I guess maybe it's tied with culture, isn't it? Which of course we have. The unconscious bias and so on of people maybe in authority around, oh, okay, what does it mean to have dyspraxia, dyslexia, and so on? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, it definitely, it does exist. And I think a lot of it is based in kind of ignorance and lack of knowledge, really. And especially in those, and I sort of talked before about kind of communication skills and the feeling comfortable in having what can be kind of difficult and conversations when people are open and vulnerable. And some people feel very uncomfortable in those situations. And unfortunately, I think it's, as essential as people managers and business leaders to be able to have the communication skills and that toolbox of communication skills ready to deal with those sorts of conversations, as it is for a business leader to know about OKRs and KPIs and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
I think where we are now in business, like really organizations need to be spending a lot of time working with business leaders on communication, because I think it's often when people feel ill-prepared or uncomfortable, that one of the defaults can be to be basically put up those walls and be dismissive, or sort of trying to understand why that's come across. And it may be as simple as just sort of ignorance, lack of understanding of what something means, or just feeling ill-prepared and uncomfortable in the situation. So certainly doesn't excuse the outcomes at all, but it tries to give some reason behind it. And I think as organizations, one of the kind of key things we can do is try and train our managers and our business leaders to basically have great communication skills. And again, coming from a medical background, that's a huge part, of medical practice. Just about learning about pharmacology and anatomy. You spend an awful lot of time learning how do you go into these conversations where you have to give really critical and sometimes challenging news, or really draw out some very sensitive information from people. And it's a skill. It isn't innate. It's a skill that is worked upon and honed, and ultimately you feel comfortable because you've got the tools you need and the skills you need in order to approach those conversations.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Rich. I think, we're at a tipping point, really, aren't we? I'm old enough to have been around this space for quite a few decades now. And, over my professional career, I've seen the difference that's happening. I think we are in quite revolutionary times around neurodiversity. And I think, what we sometimes forget, especially for those of us who are neurodivergent and maybe not feeling too confident about that and feeling very isolated, is that this is not a niche subject. there's probably about 1 in 5, 1 in 4 of us, we guesstimate, who are neurodivergent. And I'd seen something last year, Rich, during October, which is Dyslexia and Dyspraxia Awareness Time. Somebody had popped up on social media, quite a trusted voice, and said it's 1 in 2 of us who are neurodivergent. This is a huge issue. It's not a little extra add-on as part of our managerial repertoire that we think, oh, now I must consider neurodiversity. It's got to be at the very heart of what we do, I think, because there's so many of us who are neurodivergent. So I think that's really important for us to be aware of when we're thinking even about disclosure. There's lots of us. This is not something that's very particular just to a small handful of us. And for an organisation, or as the comment was shown, managers who aren't there yet, we need to get there, because we need to catch up in terms of the changing times that we're in, that we know more about this information. That's why, at Norbox, we have line manager training and so on, because the manager can set the tone for what's going to happen. And it's really important that that tone is inclusive. And it's not about, I think you'd said earlier, Rich, it's not about doing someone a favor, or, maybe as the neurodivergent person, you think, oh gosh, I'm sorry to share this, but I'm neurodivergent. And you almost feel quite, quite small and quite, I suppose, quite misunderstood sometimes on that journey. It's maybe about being quite confident as well, if you can, to feel that you understand what your rights are and that you're happy to share of yourself. So there's lots of layers here, I think. Rich, I'm going to come and ask you too, share of Carescribe, because as I said, I was aware of Carescribe for quite some time. When I saw it, it blew my mind. Rich, you guys have put together something. Wow, it's brilliant. So the question is, tell me a little bit about setting it up, because you're the founder amongst, as you say, a number of your other colleagues. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and then tell me about what Carescribe do, because it's brilliant.
Cool, Donna, thanks. So as I said, my background, setting it up, my background's in medicine, and I've been building assisted technology now for kind of over a decade. So I started, I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD, and I built a bit of tech way back when at medical school, initially to help me with a barrier that I came up against, which was actually around complex vocabularies within medicine. Medicine is rife with this huge word, long vocabularies, esoteric terms, and it's a bit of a nightmare. And as being dyslexic, I kind of came up against that and had a bit of a panic attack and looked for solutions and couldn't find anything. And in the end, built this small widget of software that I thought would be useful for myself. And you talk about, most problems are shared problems. All of my peers wanted access to it, and then lots of other people around the country, and it grew, and it's now used all over the world. So that was kind of my intro into assistive technology, and I've really been building and iterating on assistive technology ever since then, over the sort of last decade or so. We started building a couple of new pieces of software under Carescribe as an entity about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was myself, my colleague Tom, and my brother, actually, Chris, as the sort of 3 founders. And we've kind of in a relatively short space of time built a couple of amazing bits of software and a business, and we spend all day, every day, working to build this technology that's designed to support those who are neurodivergent or have disabilities to access the world, and particularly in education and the workplace. And it's been very popular and very, very rewarding. We're a sort of team of a little over 40 people now, based in Bristol, it's kind of gone from strength to strength, which is fantastic. We kind of focus on technology, so we have two pieces of software. One is called Captioned, and Captioned is a piece of captioning and note-taking software, which is really designed to help people to comprehend and retain information. So, in busy lives, I'm sure you can relate to this. We're kind of bombarded with information from all different angles and lots of different formats, and it can be pretty overwhelming for most people. And when you add on top of that a layer of neurodivergence or disability, it can be near impossible to manage. So Captioned is there essentially to kind of help to make some sense out of the noise, and ultimately help people to kind of comprehend what's being said and retain the important bits. So that's been very, very popular both in workplace and in education. And our other software I mentioned was TalkType. So TalkType is a bit of tech that it provides people the ability to dictate. So it's a dictation software, and really it's all about trying to get your thoughts down on paper. So something I find impossible is to get the thoughts out of my head and onto the screen or onto paper. And TalkType is essentially designed to help facilitate that and help introduce some flow into getting text down. And has been, again, very, very popular. So yeah, that's kind of what we do. And with regards to technology, it's one part of a holistic approach to supporting neurodivergence in the workplace. It's just kind of one piece of the puzzle, really. But we spend so much of the time maybe considering our physical environments and what we might do to make them more inclusive, but we spend so much of our working day online, so it's really important that we also consider our digital workspace as well. And that's where we live, really.
Amazing, Rich. Well, firstly, thank you for the work that you've done in that space, because it brings the barriers down, doesn't it? And what I love about Carescribe is that there's authenticity at its heart, because, as you say, you're neurodivergent folks who'd had barriers yourselves and then thought, right, let's do something about this. So it really is, it's real, and that it works, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're building the solutions that we want and we use, and creating a community as well. We're kind of passionate about our community of users. It's kind of constantly growing. We're constantly all engaged. They support each other as much as we kind of support them. It's kind of fantastic to be a part of, and hugely proud to kind of have achieved what we've achieved so far, and kind of excited about what the future holds. Absolutely.
Yeah, love it, and thank you, because it's brilliant. And it ties back to what we're talking about, because if you've disclosed, these are some of the tools that we hope that you'll be able to have access to in order to get the best out of yourself, isn't it, and bring down some of those barriers.
Absolutely.
Going back to the chat, we've got two thoughts here, and I couldn't agree more with either of them. So the first one, Rich, is talking about, employers putting on their job adverts and their person specifications that they value neurodiversity and so on, and that they welcome the different strengths that colleagues potentially are bringing within their organisation. And I think we probably both agree. I could see you were nodding when I was reading that out. Yeah, I think this is part of the very first steps, is bringing people in, and you want the best of the best, don't you, as an employer? I mean, Rich, the work you do at Carescribe, you guys are employers, aren't you? You're attracting individuals to your organisation. You want the best of the best.
Absolutely.
So yeah, please do share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Set the tone from the start, and absolutely. You just want the best individuals, and you want also you do, that diversity has huge value. There's so much sort of potential to unlock in those kind of neurodivergent individuals, that these kind of unique talents, unique skills, diversity of thought, the innovation, the creativity. There's just so much benefit to it. Why wouldn't you want that in your organization? And then when people are in the organization, if you embrace it, not only are you untapping all of that potential, but the individuals are feeling fulfilled. You start to look at staff retention, reduced attrition rates. Really is that the benefits are endless.
Yeah, I agree. So we've got that, which is wonderful, and I couldn't agree more with that comment. As Rich said, it's really important, and that sets the tone for the culture, everyone, for the organisation, isn't it? These are the clues that Rich and I were talking about earlier. If an organisation's talking in these ways, yeah, you suspect that it's probably a good place to work. Then we've got the other end, I guess, of the issues here. We've got, when I disclosed I was dyslexic, I was told by my employer, sorry for your illness. And then what is neurodivergence? And this commentator says, as Donna says, we should aim to train HR, line managers, and so on, basically the whole team to ensure as well. And then they're talking about children here. So yes, our adults in the workplace through, yeah, and it does impact on education, of course it does, through to our children, to learn about neurodiversity, our teachers, our TAs, and so on. Thank you for that. And, I still hear people say, oh, I shared that I, had dyslexia over, and somebody said to me, you don't look dyslexic. And there's lots of these comments still out there. And again, Rich, I think this is connected with culture and unconscious bias and so on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. There's still a lot of prejudice and misunderstanding. And yeah, I mean, as frustrating as those sorts of interactions are, and disheartening, opportunity. The silver lining is it's an opportunity to educate, and try and make, change it for the next person.
Yeah, I agree. It really is. And, for those of you listening to this conversation who are having a tough time for a variety of ways, and for some of you, this may be triggering what we're talking about here, listening to me reading out some of these comments, please know that you're not on your own. Please reach out to us here at NeuroBox. There's lots of free support out there as well, lots of great networks, certainly here in the UK, who are there, to provide sessions for adults for you to share your thoughts. As I said earlier, this is not a niche subject, but you can often feel that you're very isolated and very alone, and you are not. So please do reach out, and you can drop me a message and I will share of those organisations as well. More than happy to. So Rich, we thought we wouldn't have enough to chat about. We've nearly filled the hour. And I feel like we could go on and on, but I'm going to have to draw it to a close. So before we do, what are your closing thoughts on the back of this? This session is called To Disclose or Not to Disclose. Where are we at after all this really informative chat?
Yeah, I think, they're really it's a really personal decision. You're talking about, ultimately being open and vulnerable, and feel, you need to feel able to do that. I think for those who are considering whether to disclose, I think I just sort of say that, it's not weak to be vulnerable, but it's distinctly kind of brave. And the outcome is not only going to, if you did choose to do that, the outcome is not only going to help you reach your potential, but it's also very much in the interest of the organisation. So it isn't to your benefit and the detriment of the organisation. It is of mutual benefit to both. And then again, I just say for any kind of managers and leaders, is kind of make it a priority to build a psychologically safe environment where people feel comfortable to disclose. And it can be hard work, and but ultimately it will lead to unlocking so much untapped potential from those that kind of neurodivergent workforce, which is going to be great for the individuals and again great for the organisation.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. It's been such a pleasure to listen to you. And thank you for sharing of yourself as well. We said a little earlier about showing up for each other. Sharing your own lived experience really does help. If folks want to find out more about Carescribe, Rich, and as I say, for those of you who aren't sure what it is, you're in for a treat. It's brilliant. Where can we go to find out more about Carescribe?
Yeah, so carescribe.io is our website, and then from there you can link to our products and our wider business. I think one of the team, I'm sure, will pop a message in the chat. Also, connect with me, connect with us as a company, Carescribe on LinkedIn. Always happy to talk.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for giving up your time. I know you're a busy guy. You've got many different roles. And as I say, thank you. And can I just say thank you for your service as a doctor as well, because I know that the work that you guys do in the NHS is greatly appreciated. So thank you for that as well. That just leaves me to thank you as our our listeners, we hope this conversation was going to be really useful. And as I say, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Please know that you're not on your own, and please do keep in touch with us. Always happy to support, especially, we are passionate here at NeuroBox about inclusion. It's what we do all day long, folks. So yes, please do reach out to us. Rich, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
And thank you, everybody, for spending this time with us during Neurodiversity Celebration Week. It's greatly appreciated.